USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Spotlight, a weekly podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com, featuring conversations with college hockey coaches and players and journalists who cover the sport.
Welcome to USCHO Spotlight for Tuesday, April 6th, 2021. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. And Jim, today we preview the semifinal round of the 2021 Frozen Four in Pittsburgh.
And joining us now to break down this weekend's Frozen Four, he's the owner, author, whatever you want to call it, proprietor of Hockey Sense with Chris Peters, a great site, new, but if you haven't had a chance to check it out, you want to. It is the legendary Chris Peters himself. Chris, welcome to the show, and are you ready for Pittsburgh?
Jimmy, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. As soon as, I think we're all kind of just getting used to this whole idea of traveling again, right? So, but I am excited. The fact that I haven't been on an airplane or in a hotel in over a year is I'm excited to get back on there, masked and ready to go.
Well, we'll start out, and I guess it kind of start out with COVID right away, basically. The news that broke this morning that UMass will be without four of its players for the Frozen Four. We just found out moments ago that from Mike Kemp that they were left behind in Massachusetts because of COVID protocols, and that includes two pretty high-profile players, Philly Lindbergh, their goalie, who is all-world goaltender right now in college hockey, and Carson Gisevich, who's coming off just an unbelievable regional. Two really high-end players. What does this mean for UMass?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's certainly the way that Lindbergh was playing was lights out. I mean, he's been great in his NCAA tournament career over the last two trips. And to lose a player like that, and obviously the goaltender, it's essentially the most important position in the game. And certainly for them, he's been, nothing short of remarkable. But then, you also lose Gisevich, who gives you, senior leadership, a guy that, was transferred to UMass for this opportunity, to be in this moment. And, to the performance that he had in the regionals and now 17 goals out of your lineup, that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. And then, not only that, but they're down to one goaltender too. I mean, one of the other players that's out is their number three goalie. So, that's really difficult. But the good news for UMass is that Matt Murray is, probably of any of the players that they could have turned to in a situation, is one of the most experienced goalies in the country. I mean, he's got 84 career NCAA games. He's had some great moments in his career already. And is experienced being, he may not have been the starter, he may not have played, but he's been to the Frozen Four. He understands kind of what has to happen. And even though he hasn't started a game since January, I think you're looking at a guy that's been hoping and waiting for this opportunity, and he'll be hungry and could be good for them. So it's just a pretty dramatic turn for a team that I fully believe has an opportunity to win a national championship here. Even with the losses, it's going to be difficult, but I still think that they have the depth and they have, a good decor that could potentially help them continue to advance. And I do think Murray's good enough to get them over the hump.
Do you think something like this can motivate a team even more? I know you don't need motivation to play in a Frozen Four, but this is a team that seemed pretty determined. This is obviously a huge bump. And, I remember going back to January and talking to Greg Carvel. One of his biggest concerns was that he would get through the whole year without any COVID cases. And then at the worst time, whether it was the Hockey East tournament or the NCAA tournament, they would pop up with some positive cases. But I think it could be a kind of a factor that could motivate these teams.
I think so. I mean, I think that you just you have to be, kind of hardened to it. You have to basically say, all right, who's going to step up? And it's going to have to be Matt Murray, obviously. But then you say, okay, well, we still have Bobby Trevino, Trevino, who's been so good this season. We still have our D-core intact. We have guys who can put the puck in the net. We play within a structure that is allowed us to shut down opposing teams. And I think the thing that has always fascinated me about this UMass team is their ability to adapt to the games that are in front of them. And if you want to play a high flying style, if you want to play a shut it down style, they will find a way to make that work for them, and they have the personnel to do that. So I do think that they will continue to be motivated, and I think when you look at Lindbergh and Gisevich, and you're just like, hey, we gotta play for those guys. We have to make sure that we have something to come home with, so that they know that this season, they contributed to this title, and I think that there's a lot of motivation there, because there's been a lot of doubts about a lot of these guys. Not most of these guys were not top end recruits. They were not highly sought after guys. Many of them not drafted. So there's a lot of things that can kind of motivate you in this situation. It's just a matter of, okay, this happened. How do we deal with this adversity? And I think that certainly Greg Carvel and his staff are going to be preaching, this is just another bump in the road. That this is a program that's had many bumps over the years, but it's always managed to come. We've gotten to this point and can still come out on top. And I think they're going to have supreme confidence in Matt Murray. It just helps to have a goalie that has that experience that can get you to that level.
Chris, you mentioned about UMass and not being the big draft picks and so forth. With the teams that have made it to the Frozen Four, this discussion has come up. Do we have an indication that like age and grit are more essential than youth, especially when you look at Wisconsin and Boston College and to a large extent Minnesota getting bounced from the tournament?
Yeah, I think it's a huge factor. I mean, yeah, definitely with so many teams with upperclassmen and it's just the thing that you have with those older players. They've got, many of them multiple years of junior hockey experience on top of their collegiate experience. And so they've learned a lot of the tricks of the trade. They've learned a lot of things, and that's where they make up for the potential lack of skill or talent. And but I think that most of these teams, they have guys that are physically strong, defensively responsible, play well within a system. And I think that the systems in general have been just as important. I mean, you look at the way that Minnesota Duluth can make it impossible to get through the middle of the ice, and the way that you've got the mobility and talent of UMass, and that they can kind of get you in waves, and then Minnesota State with their attacking style, one of the best possession teams in the country, that took that game to Minnesota, which had quite a bit of veterans on their team, but were still relatively young, and not quite as strong, and they struggled with that. So, and then certainly, you look at the way that St. Cloud ran through Boston University and Boston College, and yeah, absolutely, they beat those teams with strength, with solid defense, with a gritty game. And that can matter. I think you can win a lot of different ways in college hockey, but the one thing that you have to do is you have to be responsible and defensively responsible. And these teams all were that in their games. And I think that that's going to be, that's the thing, is now they have to do it against each other. And I think they're all going to find it's a lot harder to do that, in this environment, because they're all so sound. I think there's a lot of similarities among all these teams.
Well, Chris, let's start breaking down these two semifinals, and you've done a pretty good job right there summarizing a lot of what some of the positives are, and there does seem like there's a lot of similarities between all four of these teams. But let's start with the early game: St. Cloud State, Minnesota State. You and your reporting, marked Dryden McKay as kind of the X factor in this game for Minnesota State, but I don't think anybody would be shocked to see a Minnesota State victory in this game, but you still have to think of St. Cloud as a favorite in this one, no?
I agree. I think, I think that there's just a little bit more in terms of skill level and speed. But man, I think it's super tight. I really, especially after watching Minnesota State just thoroughly dismantle Minnesota, and just completely shut them down and allow them really nothing throughout that game. I mean, that was eye-opening. I knew they were a good team. I knew that Dryden McKay was a good goaltender. I knew that they had great defense, and obviously they kept possession But I did not expect them to just so thoroughly run through that. So, I think that you look at guys like Vieti Miettinen and certainly Nick Perbix, Yemi Kranola as well. All those guys are, really talented players that have found ways to kind of get through and can match that up tempo and aggressive style of a Minnesota State. But yeah, I think that, the reason I have McKay as an X factor is because I think that he gives Minnesota State an advantage. They're so good. They have so many layers that you have to get through, but then you also have to get through one of the best goaltenders in the country. And he's, he doesn't have the prototypical size. He's not necessarily, a guy that jumps off the page at you, but he is absolutely locked in. And I think we've seen that in the last couple of games. He's made some huge saves in big moments all season long. And that's why he's one of the Hobie guys. He's one of the Hobie hat trick guys because he's done that for that team all year. So yeah, I think that you could give a slight edge to St. Cloud State, but I think it's really slight at that point. Just because I think we saw the Minnesota State has a good amount of skill, a good amount of speed, and certainly has the physicality to wear teams down.
I didn't get to see a whole lot of McKay during the regular season, but during the playoffs, one of the things that impressed me is how well his defense plays around him, really taking away just about everything except what McKay has to stop. How big is that defensive system for McKay's success?
It's huge because he faced the fewest amount of shots of the top goaltenders. If you look at the guys that were Richter finalists, and you say, obviously Spencer Knight saw a lot of shots. The shots per game rate that McKay had was far lower than pretty much everybody else on that list. So that's a huge factor, and that starts with the possession. I think one of the things that Minnesota State has done repeatedly over the years is they have defensemen that can defend well first, but then have tremendous mobility and puck moving skills that allows them to kind of maintain possession. They get the pucks out of their zone really quickly. They shut things down in front of the net. They let their goaltender see the shots that he needs to see. And I think it all comes back to that foundation of mobility and playing with pace. So they're really, that's a team game. I think it's not just on the defensemen, it's certainly on the forwards as well in terms of how they can really mash up the defensive zone. But I think that the way that they are going to be successful is the same way that they were successful against Minnesota rather, which is to just simply take the game and dictate the pace of the game and essentially control the puck as a result. And then that is what really allows McKay to flourish, is that, he's not seeing a ton of quality shots, but when he does, he still is able to make that save.
Chris, anybody that watched the Albany Regional saw the painful injury that ended the season of Austin Brodzinski for St. Cloud State. How do you replace a player like that if you're Brett Larson? I mean, maybe not replaceable, but who do you feel is somebody that could maybe step up on that team and really take the place of a goal scorer who played very well down the stretch, had a great opening game of the regionals against Boston University? Is that a player that can be replaced, or do you just have to hopefully find ways to fill small holes?
Yeah, it's going to have to be by committee, I think. Brodzinski is such an important player to that team. I mean, he's a leader in so many ways, and certainly plays the right way and plays the way that you want your team to emulate. But the guy that I think really has to take his game up a level, and it's hard to ask this of a freshman, but it's Vieti Miettinen, whose numbers have dipped significantly in the tough part of the season. And he's a guy that needs to, he's highly skilled, has a deadly release, and when he gets his shots, he doesn't miss. But it's been a lot harder to come by that time and space that he needs to create. So you basically have to fight through everything that Minnesota State throws at you and have to let your skill guys really shine through. And that's really where Miettinen has to be better. I think that he was so good at the beginning of the season, and he's been good through most of the season. But if he can be a little bit better, that helps soften the blow of the loss of an Easton Brodzinski. And then you're just saying, okay, well, where else is that going to come from? And they have guys like Zach Okabe, and they have, Cronella, as I mentioned, that, guys that have produced this season. So, it's going to be kind of by committee, because it's really difficult to replace your leading goal scorer at this time of year. Obviously, UMass is going to have to do the same thing for different reasons. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be really tough. And gosh, that was such a tough injury to see to a player that I think really earned his way to, having this moment of being in the Frozen Four and having this stage, because he's been a really good college hockey player.
More with Chris Peters in a moment.
This is the USCHO Spotlight, a weekly podcast from US College Hockey Online.
We're talking with Chris Peters, national college hockey writer, hockey writer in general. He covers the game from every angle, it seems, and does it very well. Chris, we'll turn to the other national semifinals. I know we've already talked a little bit about UMass and the players that they're now going to be without, but maybe look at the other side of this. Minnesota Duluth, they're the team with national tournament experience, 2 straight national championships, knowing that last year's, of course, never happened. But the older players on this squad are pretty experienced at what they're about to go through over the next 4 or 5 days. What are the advantages that you think that Duluth has, just having been there and had some success on this national stage?
Yeah, I mean, it helps a ton. And I think it really helps that Scott Sandelin just knows how to get his team ready for this time of year. And I listed him as the X factor for this team. I think the Sandelin just has his team play the right way, and they play within their structure, and they're able to, kind of be more opportunistic than, let's say, like a Minnesota State, where they're really trying to dictate the pace. I think that, Minnesota Duluth is more, we're going to make you have to fight for every inch of ice and, kind of, especially in our own zone and getting to the middle of the ice. So, having guys that have been in that system for so long, it just enhances their ability to play it, and it enhances their experience in having success with it. And I mean, North Dakota, who obviously they beat in the overtime, they had pretty much owned that game for most of it, where they didn't necessarily have a huge possession advantage, but they were definitely playing better. They were the better team for most of that game. And that kind of just shows that they're a team when it gets to this stage of the season, they can really flip a switch, because there have been times this year where they've been pretty average, and there have been times where they've been inconsistent. I think that part of that is within the transition that they've had to go through on defense, and they have a lot more younger players, and obviously in the goaltending position as well. But then you have those experienced guys like Louis Rail and Cole Koepke and Noah and Jackson Cates, and Nick Sweeney, they all step up and they make plays, and they're able to make things happen. So, I think that experience is the biggest factor and the biggest advantage that this team has. And even though, it's especially true up front, but I think we even saw their young defensemen, mostly with Wyatt Kaiser being the guy that really stepped up and played a significant role for that team, kind of fill the gaps that have been left by some of the great defensemen that Minnesota Duluth has been able to lean on in their previous championship seasons.
Chris, when I think back to the 2019 national championship game, one thing that stood out to me as I think back on it is UMass maybe not adjusting to some of what UMD threw at them. I think about the power play, UMD packing it in tight, and UMass kind of pushing in and not really doing anything to try to pull things open and some things like that. Is that a lesson that Greg Carvel and his staff have probably learned from that 2019 game?
I think it is, and I think it showed up throughout this season, actually, because that's one of the things that I think really UMass has done very well this year is adjust to those games. And I'm thinking of the Hockey East Championship, where it was a knockdown, drag-out fight with UMass Lowell, where offense was hard to come by, but I still think that they managed to play that game and kind of almost beat Lowell at their own game, but barely to win the title. And so, and then you see the way that they played in the regionals, and they were able to open things up more, and they just kind of dictated the pace of the games. And Bemidji State actually, I think, is a pretty decent kind of practice round for what UMD does, and obviously they've had the experience of being in in the tournament. But they were really able to crack open the middle of the ice in that game. I think it starts with their defensemen who really move the puck extremely well, Zach Jones and Matt Kessel. I think that they're going to be hugely important, just as Cale Makar and Mario Ferraro were a few years ago. And certainly, Mark Del Gaizo as well, very similar, and obviously has had the experience of scoring, the biggest goal in school history. So I think that that's important. Then you look at, this is where they're really going to miss Gisevich, though, because he was so good at the net front and just really created a lot of havoc in the middle of the ice. And so that's where you say, all right, well, maybe our freshman Josh Lopina can kind of fill that gap. That's where Bobby Trevino needs to be a bigger factor, is in the middle of the ice. And so I think that they're able to make those adjustments and find those little, kind of let the game kind of come to them a little bit, and then figure out the way that they need to play and how they can ultimately beat the team that's in front of them. So the way that they played for the last few weeks, that's where I think that they could certainly have a huge advantage, just knowing that, hey, if we don't get this right quickly, it can get away from us pretty fast, as they saw 2 years ago.
Well, Chris, before we let you go, last time we talked to you, you were wrapping up your tenure with ESPN, and you've gone into your own venture now, Hockey Sense with Chris Peters at hockeysense.substack.com, and also the Talking Hockey Sense podcast, which I've also enjoyed. Both sites, both places for content I'm enjoying immensely. But could you maybe just tell us a little bit about what you're covering and what you hope to cover in the future going forward with your new venture?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Ed. Yeah, it's been fun. It's been fun to do. So yeah, Talking Hockey Sense, the podcast is basically just kind of the, I try to have one guest on a week, and we talk a lot of different things. It covers all facets of the game. We started with Bob McKenzie, and we had John Butchergross, and last week Brad Schlossman, and we've done a lot of college hockey just because it's that time of year, and so we wanted to certainly give a lot for college hockey fans. But it's not just that. It's also about covering the NHL draft, NHL prospects that are already drafted at various levels. I'll be at the World Under-18 Championship coming up pretty soon, to cover that. So there's a lot of things like that. And then also a heavy focus on U.S. Olympic preparation, which is something that I've always enjoyed doing. Having worked at USA Hockey before, I feel like I can provide some unique insight. And so, so I try to do that. And it's been cool to kind of be on the independent side again, because I had my old blog, United States of Hockey. And I've kind of been able to recreate that and even go even more in depth now, because I'm able to travel and certainly, we're charging for subscriptions, but that's really to allow me to continue to do the work at a professional level, similar to what I was doing at ESPN. So I hope that I'm kind of recreating that, but we try to have a little bit of something for everybody, and I keep saying we, but it's really just me doing it. But it's like the hockey guy in me, I guess. But I really think that it's been so much fun. It's been rejuvenating too. Obviously, I was disappointed to leave ESPN and not be able to continue there, but this has opened up a lot of new opportunities for me, and doing both the podcast and the website have been a blast, and I appreciate you guys letting me give it a little plug, and also checking it out yourselves, because it's been great, and got a big old Frozen Four preview, and I'm going to continue updating it, because as we know, probably after we record this, something is going to change. So but this is it's been great, and I can't wait to get out to Pittsburgh and be able to cover the Frozen Four live.
Well, Chris, we always appreciate your time and great insight. You've done this for so long now. It's good to have those people this time of year who can give that type of insight. So we appreciate it. We'll talk to you again from Pittsburgh live when we do our next podcast after the national semifinals. But we appreciate your time today, and travel safe. And hopefully we'll be catching up within the next 24 hours on the ground in Pittsburgh.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you soon.
Jim, a lot of good insights from Chris Peters. I want to touch on the thing about age and grit and experience. It really does feel like these four teams that are getting in there have really taken advantage of it through the NCAA playoffs. And like Chris said, I don't know who's going to be able to prevail in this, with all four teams really employing a really good puck management style and a lot of physicality.
Yeah, I agree. I think that these four teams, and the more I've really kind of looked at each team and analyzed each roster, they're very similar the way that they're built. Nobody has the flashy superstar. Our biggest name, if you will, in this entire Frozen Four is a goaltender. In Dryden McKay, and obviously Philly Lindbergh would have been right there with him, until the issues that arose today with COVID. But I think that it feels wide open. But then I go back and I seem to always look at Minnesota Duluth when I think that something feels wide open and realize that they have so much experience in this event in the last decade and especially in the last 3 years. And, they are the team that when they will get onto this big stage on Thursday and again on Saturday, they won't panic. It's just not what they do. And I think that that's something that can't get lost in all of this.
With UMass losing those four players, there is going to have to be somebody who steps up. And I don't think we spent much time talking about one of them, Bobby Trevino.
Trevino's huge, Josh Lapina, and I think Garrett Wade. I think those are the three players that you really look at. Wade was playing some very good hockey late in the season. I talked to Greg Carville, I think it was before the Hockey East semifinals, about Wade. And he said that when he came from Minnesota, he wasn't maybe in the best shape, and he kind of had to get used to playing in their system and, living up to certain expectations of Carville and his staff. And he's transformed himself very well. And I think that has been important. I think that if there's one player who maybe can kind of put that effort and grit in front of the net, he is one. Obviously, you've got, really, really skilled finishers in both Lapina, and Trevino, but I think that line together will be counted on. I don't know that they'll be able to keep them together now with the hole created by Giskevich, and obviously the power play is going to be very impacted, losing a player like Carson. But I think that this UMass team has the depth. Greg Carville always says we don't have a superstar. 2 years ago we had a superstar, and people try to compare those two teams. They're completely different in my eyes. And I think that this team is the more complete team. That is what is going to be tested the most with the loss of players like Giskevich and like Lindbergh.
I think if you're talking complete teams, it would be hard to find a team that is more complete yet without any standout go-to scorers than Minnesota State. I was a little skeptical of them watching that game against Quinnipiac where they came back to tie and then to win in overtime. But their complete dominance of Minnesota really sold me on the Mavericks.
Same here. When I saw that they were down late against Quinnipiac, I said, well, it's going to be another one of those years. But this is a team that has a lot of talent. And it's similar to UMass, where you have some good players, but nobody that is just a household name, but they get it done. And that's one of those things that you look at when teams can win games. And I think that, there was certain teams in the country that were extremely disappointed a year ago when the whole season was shut down in early March. This Minnesota State team had been the most disappointed. I think at that time they were number one in the pairwise. They were going to be the number one overall seed in the tournament, most likely. Their fans understood that they had, and they were going to graduate some pretty good players. They were bringing back McKay. That was a good thing. But when you really look at this team, if anybody feels like this has been a redemption tour this whole season, not because they let anybody down, but they themselves were let down. And I feel that can be one of those motivating factors, that there's unfinished business on the table for really three of these teams, UMass, St. Cloud, and Minnesota State. But I think that I look at the Mavericks and think that they really have something they know that they can go out and prove on the biggest stage.
Well, coming up this week, we're either going to have a first-time national championship or a three-peat from Minnesota Duluth for the first time since the early 50s when Michigan did it. It's going to be some great hockey. We'll update you with a podcast episode from Pittsburgh later this week after the semifinal round is over. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you then.
This has been the USCHO Spotlight, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.